negotiation, then a family reunion. They offered me a drink, which I declined, and then settled into their chairs with the practiced ease of people about to present a closing argument. "Carson," my father began, "I'm sure you're aware that our firm has been facing some challenges recently. Certain allegations have been made, and we're dealing with a federal investigation that's based on completely false accusations. We need to protect our digital communications and client files from overzealous investigators," my mother added. "Your cybersecurity expertise could be invaluable in helping us navigate this difficult situation." There it was, the real reason for their sudden interest in rebuilding our relationship. Not love, not regret, not a desire to make amends for 8 years of silence. They needed my services, and they thought they could manipulate me into providing them. "I see," I said calmly. "So this invitation wasn't about family reconciliation. It was about hiring SecureVault for your legal troubles." My mother's expression softened in what I recognized as her sympathetic prosecutor face, the one she used with juries when she needed to appear vulnerable. "Of course we want to rebuild our relationship," she said. "But we also thought this could be an opportunity for you to help your family while expanding your business into the legal sector. It's a win-win situation. And naturally, we'd be prepared to offer very generous compensation," my father added. "Plus, we've been reconsidering some of the financial arrangements we modified 8 years ago. Your trust fund, your inheritance, all of that could be restored." I had to admire their strategy. They were offering me money I had never needed, inheritance I had never wanted, and the conditional love that had already proven worthless. It was exactly the kind of proposal that might have worked on the broken, desperate young man who had left this house 8 years ago. Unfortunately for them, that young man no longer existed. That's a very interesting offer. I remember that October morning like it happened yesterday, even though 8 years have passed since my parents decided I was better off dead to them. I was 26 years old, fresh out of Stanford, with a computer science degree that had cost them over $200,000, and I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life, telling them the truth about my dreams. Judge Harold Blackwell and District Attorney Patricia Blackwell didn't just practice law. They worshipped it like a religion. Their sprawling mansion in Bellevue was a shrine to legal achievement, with framed diplomas, awards, and newspaper clippings covering every wall. They had built a dynasty, and I was supposed to be the crown prince who would carry their legacy into the next generation. The meeting happened in Dad's home office, surrounded by leather-bound law books and portraits of stern-faced judges from centuries past. Mom sat rigid in her chair, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the mahogany desk. Dad stood behind his chair like he was presiding over a courtroom. His black judicial robes replaced by an expensive charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month. "Carson." Dad began, his voice carrying the same authoritative tone he used to sentence criminals. "We've been patient with your computer hobby long enough. It's time to grow up and join the family practice. We've already reserved your spot at Yale Law School for next fall." I took a deep breath, knowing the words I was about to speak would detonate like a bomb in that pristine office. "Dad, I'm not going to law school. I want to start my own technology company. I've been working on cybersecurity software that could revolutionize how businesses protect their data." The silence that followed was deafening. Mom's face went pale, then flushed red with anger. Dad's knuckles turned white as he gripped the back of his chair. "Cybersecurity software?" Mom's voice dripped with disdain. "Carson, you're talking about playing with computers when you could be arguing cases in the Supreme Court. Do you have any idea how many strings we had to pull to get you into Yale?" "I never asked you to pull those strings," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I want to build something meaningful, something that can help protect people's digital lives. Technology is the future, and I want to be part of creating that future." Dad's face darkened like storm clouds gathering. The future. The future is making real money in a respectable profession. Your computer games aren't going to pay for the lifestyle you've grown accustomed to. This isn't a game, Dad. I've already written the core algorithms for a security platform that could be worth millions. I just need time to develop it properly. Millions. Dad laughed, a harsh sound that bounced off the walls. Carson, I make millions. Your mother makes millions. We own 3 houses, 4 cars, and a yacht. That's what success looks like. Not sitting in some garage, pretending to be the next Steve Jobs. The conversation spiraled downhill from there. They accused me of being ungrateful, naive, and delusional. They said I was throwing away every advantage they'd worked their entire lives to give me. When I stood my ground explaining my vision for the company and my belief that I could make a real difference in the world, Dad delivered the final blow. If you walk out that door to pursue this foolishness, you're no longer our son. We'll cut off your credit cards, your trust fund, everything. You'll be completely on your own. I looked at Mom, hoping to see some flicker of understanding or support in her eyes. Instead, she nodded in agreement with Dad's ultimatum. Don't contact us until you come to your senses, she said coldly. We won't enable this fantasy any longer. I stood up, my legs shaking, but my resolve firm. Then I guess this is goodbye. As I walked toward the door, I heard Dad making a phone call. Yes, this is Judge Blackwell. I need you to draft some paperwork removing my son from all family trusts and the will. Yes, effective immediately. That's when I realized this wasn't an emotional decision made in the heat of the moment. They had planned this confrontation, complete with legal documentation prepared in advance. They had already written me off before I even walked into that room. I drove away from the only home I'd ever known with my laptop, 2 suitcases of clothes, and $1,700 in my checking account. By the time I reached the end of their street, they had already changed the security codes on the gates and blocked my phone number. I was officially dead to them. The cruel twist I discovered later made their betrayal even more devastating. While I was sleeping in my car and eating from food banks, they had hired a private investigator to monitor my every move. They knew exactly how badly I was struggling, how close I came to giving up, and they chose to watch me suffer rather than offer even the smallest gesture of support. That night, parked outside a 24-hour diner in downtown Seattle, I made myself a promise. I would build my company, not just to prove them wrong, but to prove to myself that their love had never been unconditional in the first place. I was better off without people who could discard their own child like yesterday's newspaper. The first thing you learn about being homeless is that dignity becomes a luxury you can't afford. I spent my first week living out of my Honda Civic, a 2006 model with over 200,000 miles that my parents had bought me for my 16th birthday. It was supposed to teach me responsibility. Instead, it became my only shelter from the Seattle rain that seemed to fall every single day that October. I discovered that the Walmart on Aurora Avenue North stayed open 24 hours, which meant I could park in their lot and use their restrooms without getting towed. The fluorescent lights made everything look sickly yellow, and the security guards knew exactly what I was doing there. But they left me alone, as long as I bought something every few hours. Energy drinks and protein bars became my diet because they didn't need refrigeration and could keep me alert during the endless coding sessions. Planet Fitness became my salvation for $20 a month. Not for the exercise equipment, but for the showers. I'd arrive at 5 in the morning when they opened cleanup and then head to various coffee shops around the city to work on my cybersecurity platform. The baristas at Starbucks on Pine Street got used to seeing me nursing a single cup of coffee for 6 hours while I typed furiously on my laptop. My first startup data fortress was supposed to revolutionize password management for small businesses. I had the technical skills, but zero understanding of business development, marketing, or customer acquisition. I spent 9 months building the most elegant encryption algorithms you've ever seen, only to discover that nobody wanted to buy software from a guy working out of a coffee shop who couldn't even afford business cards. The breaking point came when I pitched Data Fortress to a venture capital firm downtown. I wore my only suit, the one I'd owned since college, and practiced my presentation until I could recite it backwards. The meeting lasted exactly 12 minutes before the lead investor, a woman named Catherine Wells, told me they weren't interested in funding hobby projects. That night, I calculated my debt $63,000 on credit cards, plus another $15,000 I'd borrowed from old college friends who thought they were helping me through a rough patch. The interest payments alone were eating up the small amounts I made from freelance coding gigs. I was drowning, and there was nobody left to throw me a rope. During those darkest months, I maintained one tradition that kept me connected to the family that had abandoned me. Every birthday, every Christmas, every Mother's Day and Father's Day, I bought a card from the dollar store and mailed it to my parents' house. The messages were simple: thinking of you on your special day, or hoping your holiday is filled with joy. I never mentioned my circumstances or asked for help. I just wanted them to know I was still alive and still loved them despite everything. Every single card came back with a red stamp, "Return to sender." They didn't even open them. I started keeping those returned cards in a shoebox under the passenger seat of my car, a growing collection of rejected olive branches that served as a daily reminder of what I was fighting for. The warehouse job at Northwest Distribution saved my life literally. Working the midnight shift meant I could sleep during the day and code in the evenings, plus the 40-hour weeks gave me enough money to rent a studio apartment in Rainier Valley. It was 600 square feet of paradise compared to living in my car, even if the carpet was stained and the neighbors played music until 3 in the morning. My supervisor, a guy named Tony Ramirez, became the closest thing I had to family during those years. He knew I was overqualified for loading trucks, but he never asked questions when I showed up to work with dark circles under my eyes from coding all night. When I finally told him about my startup dreams, he said something that changed my perspective forever. "Carson, the difference between successful people and everyone else isn't talent or money. It's that successful people get back up one more time than they get knocked down." That conversation happened on a Tuesday night in March during my 3rd year of warehouse work. I was loading boxes of electronics onto a truck bound for Portland when my phone buzzed with an email. A small cybersecurity firm in Tacoma wanted to hire me as a freelance consultant for their government contracts. The pay was 3 times what I made at the warehouse, and it would give me experience with the kind of high-level security protocols I needed to understand for my next venture. I gave Tony my 2 weeks' notice that night. Before I left Northwest Distribution, he pulled me aside and handed me a folded piece of paper with a phone number written on it. "This is my brother Miguel," he explained. "He's a patent attorney downtown. When you build something worth protecting, give him a call. Family discount." That piece of paper stayed in my wallet for 2 years before I finally had something worth protecting. But Tony's faith in my future success meant more to me than my actual parents' support ever had. Some families are born, and some families are chosen. I was starting to understand the difference. The returned birthday cards continued arriving like clockwork, each one another nail in the coffin of any hope for reconciliation. But they also became fuel for my determination. Every rejection reminded me that I was building something not just for financial success, but for the emotional satisfaction of proving that their love had been conditional all along. By year 6 of exile, I had stopped feeling sorry for myself and started feeling grateful. The hunger, the fear, the constant uncertainty had forged me into someone much stronger than the privileged kid who had walked out of his parents' mansion. I had learned to survive on my own terms, to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation, and to find purpose in work that actually mattered. I just didn't know yet that my parents had been watching my struggle from the shadows, documenting my failures, while refusing to lift a finger to help. That revelation was still waiting for me, along with the perfect opportunity for revenge. SecureVault wasn't born from inspiration. It was born from desperation and a 26-hour coding marathon that nearly killed me. The idea hit me during my second year as a freelance consultant when I watched a small accounting firm lose everything to a ransomware attack. Their data was encrypted, their backups compromised, and their business destroyed in under 4 hours. The existing security solutions were either too expensive for small businesses or too complicated for non-technical users. I saw an opportunity to build something different, enterprise-level cybersecurity that was affordable, intuitive, and could adapt to threats in real time. The technical challenges were immense. I needed to create algorithms that could detect anomalies in network traffic, prevent data exfiltration, and maintain system performance without requiring a team of IT specialists to manage. My tiny apartment became mission control. I covered the walls with flowcharts, network diagrams, and lines of code printed on copy paper from the local library. My dining table disappeared under stacks of cybersecurity textbooks, empty energy drink cans, and notebooks filled with equations that would make most people's heads spin. I was living like a hermit, but I was building something revolutionary. The breakthrough came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday in February. I had been struggling with a machine learning algorithm that could predict attack patterns based on minimal data when suddenly the solution appeared in my mind, like a bolt of lightning. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I coded for 18 straight hours, stopping only to use the bathroom and gulp down protein shakes. When I finally tested the completed algorithm, it performed better than I had dared to hope. It could identify potential threats with 97% accuracy and implement countermeasures automatically. More importantly, it could learn from each attack attempt and strengthen its defenses accordingly. I had created a cybersecurity system that could essentially think for itself. Finding the right team members was like assembling a superhero squad, except my superheroes were brilliant misfits who had been overlooked by traditional tech companies. Amanda Walsh became my first hire, a former marketing executive who had left the corporate world after watching her ideas get stolen by male colleagues. She understood the frustration of being underestimated and brought a strategic mind that complemented my technical skills perfectly. Marcus Chen joined us 6 months later as Chief Technology Officer. He had been blacklisted from Silicon Valley after exposing security vulnerabilities at his previous company that management wanted to keep quiet. His reputation for absolute honesty made him unemployable at companies that valued public relations over public safety, but it made him invaluable to me. Our first office was a converted storage unit in Georgetown that we rented for $800 a month. We furnished it with folding tables from Costco camping chairs and enough computer equipment to run a small data center. The space was freezing in winter, sweltering in summer, and constantly smelled like the Thai restaurant next door. It was perfect. The early days required sacrifices that tested everyone's commitment. We worked 7 days a week, slept on air mattresses in the office when deadlines loomed, and survived on pizza and determination. Amanda maxed out her credit cards to keep us operational. Marcus sold his car and rode the bus to work. I liquidated my retirement account and stopped paying myself entirely for 8 months. But we were building something that mattered. Our first major client was a chain of medical clinics that had been devastated by a data breach the year before. When SecureVault prevented 3 separate attack attempts in the first month of deployment, word started spreading through the healthcare industry like wildfire. The Department of Defense contract changed everything. Landing a government cybersecurity deal meant undergoing background checks that would make the FBI proud, but it also meant credibility that no amount of marketing could buy. When other businesses saw that we were trusted to protect national security data, they wanted that same level of protection for their operations. Amanda proved her worth by negotiating contracts that were profitable without being exploitative. She understood that our long-term success depended on client satisfaction rather than short-term revenue maximization. Marcus built systems that could scale from protecting a corner coffee shop to securing multinational corporations. Together, we created a company culture based on competence, integrity, and mutual respect. The growth was exponential but controlled. We hired carefully choosing people who shared our values over those with impressive resumes. Every new team member had to understand that we weren't just building software, we were building a company that could make the digital world safer for everyone. By year 3, SecureVault was protecting over 2,000 businesses across North America. Our revenue had grown to $85 million annually, and we were being courted by venture capital firms that had previously dismissed us as too small to matter. The same investors who had called my work a hobby project were now offering to buy equity at valuations that would make us all wealthy beyond our wildest dreams. The Forbes recognition came as a complete shock. I was debugging code at 2 a.m. when Amanda burst into my office with her laptop practically bouncing with excitement. "Carson, you need to see this right now," she said, pulling up the Forbes website. There I was listed among the most promising entrepreneurs under 30 in America. The article described SecureVault as a cybersecurity platform that could redefine how businesses protect themselves in an increasingly dangerous digital landscape. My personal net worth was estimated at $100 million based on our latest funding round. The team threw an impromptu celebration in the office that night, complete with champagne that Marcus had been saving for exactly this kind of occasion. We toasted to the journey that had brought us from a storage unit to the pages of a national magazine. As I looked around at the people who had believed in our vision when nobody else would, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete satisfaction with the family I had chosen. That satisfaction lasted exactly 3 days until the text message from my mother arrived and reminded me that some chapters of my life were still unfinished. The parents who had written me off as a failure now wanted to discuss something important. I had a pretty good idea what that something might be, and I was more than ready to have that conversation. But first, I needed to do some research on exactly why Harold and Patricia Blackwell might suddenly be interested in cybersecurity services. What I discovered would make our reunion even more interesting than I had originally planned. David Rodriguez wasn't just my attorney, he was my strategic advisor confidant, and the closest thing I had to an older brother. We met during my 3rd year of building SecureVault when I needed legal help with a contract dispute. Most lawyers charged $500 an hour just to return phone calls, but David was different. He had left his position as a federal prosecutor to work with tech startups because he believed technology could solve problems that the legal system couldn't touch. When I told him about the text from my mother, his expression shifted from casual interest to intense focus. David had grown up in East Los Angeles, the son of immigrants who had sacrificed everything to give him opportunities they never had. The idea of parents abandoning their child was foreign to his experience, and it made him angry in a way that surprised me. "Carson, I need to tell you something," David said, leaning forward in his chair across from my desk. "I know your parents by reputation. Harold Blackwell has been on the federal radar for years, and your mother's office has been under investigation for prosecutorial misconduct in at least 6 cases that I know of." This was news to me. During my years in exile, I had deliberately avoided following my parents' careers. Reading about their legal victories while I was sleeping in my car would have been too painful, so I had trained myself to skip over any news articles that mentioned their names. What kind of investigation? What can investigate? I asked, though. I was already starting to understand why they might suddenly need cybersecurity services. David pulled up several news articles on his tablet. 3 months ago, the Seattle Times published an expose about corruption in the King County legal system. Your father was mentioned specifically for allegedly taking bribes to influence sentencing in high-profile cases. Your mother's office is being investigated for withholding exculpatory evidence in multiple criminal trials. The pieces started falling into place. My parents weren't reaching out because they missed me or wanted to rebuild our relationship. They needed SecureVault services to protect their digital communications from federal investigators. The important thing to discuss was a business proposition, not a family reunion. There's more, David continued. The FBI raided Blackwell and Associates 2 weeks ago. They seized computers, phones, and financial records. Word is that several partners are cooperating with investigators in exchange for reduced sentences. I felt a mixture of vindication and disgust. The same people who had condemned me for choosing a disreputable career were now facing federal charges for actual corruption. The irony was so perfect, it almost hurt. But I wanted more than just the satisfaction of their downfall. I wanted them to understand exactly what their abandonment had cost both for them and for me. That required gathering evidence of their behavior over the past 8 years, evidence that would be impossible for them to deny or rationalize. The first step was documenting their surveillance of my struggles. Through David's contacts in the private investigation industry, we discovered that Blackwell and Associates had indeed hired a firm called Northwest Intelligence Services to monitor my activities from the day I left their house until just 18 months ago. The reports were detailed and heartbreaking descriptions of me, sleeping in my car, eating from food banks, working the midnight shift at the warehouse. Reading those reports was like watching my life through a stranger's eyes. The investigators had photographed me walking into Planet Fitness with a gym bag full of clean clothes, buying dollar store greeting cards for parents who wouldn't speak to me, and falling asleep at coffee shop tables after coding for 16 hours straight. They knew exactly how much I was suffering, and they had shared that information with my parents in monthly summaries. The most damaging evidence was a recorded phone conversation between my father and the head of Northwest Intelligence. David's contact managed to obtain it through channels I didn't ask about. In the recording, the investigator describes watching me collapse from exhaustion outside a 7-Eleven in Tacoma, and my father's response was chilling. Good. Maybe he'll learn some humility and come back to us on our terms. But the surveillance reports revealed something even more sinister. My parents had been actively sabotaging my business efforts. When Data Fortress was close to securing its first major investor, Harold had used his connections to convince the venture capital firm that I was financially unstable and legally unreliable. The investor withdrew their offer without explanation, leaving me confused and defeated. This wasn't just abandonment, it was deliberate destruction. They had watched me struggle, documented my pain, and then intervened to make sure I failed completely. Their plan was to break me down until I had no choice but to come crawling back and accept their version of success. With Amanda's help, I started gathering witness statements from people who had supported me during the darkest years. Tony Ramirez wrote a powerful letter describing the young man who had loaded trucks while dreaming of building something meaningful. The baristas at various coffee shops provided photos and receipts showing how I had essentially lived in their establishments while working on my code. Even some of my college friends who had initially believed my parents' story about me, finding myself abroad, agreed to document what they had actually witnessed. The most painful evidence to assemble was the collection of returned birthday and holiday cards. I had kept them in a shoebox for 8 years, not knowing why. Now I understood they were proof that I had never stopped loving my parents, even when they had made it clear that their love for me was purely conditional. Marcus helped me create a digital presentation that would tell the complete story: the surveillance, the sabotage, the returned cards, and the contrast between their public image and private behavior. We included financial documents showing how SecureVault had grown from nothing into a $100 million company, despite their efforts to destroy my prospects. The final piece of my preparation was the most important, defining what I wanted to achieve at their Christmas party. This wasn't about revenge, though that would be satisfying. It was about justice, accountability, and closure. I wanted my parents to face the truth about what they had done, and I wanted their friends and family to understand exactly what kind of people Harold and Patricia Blackwell really were. David helped me draft a formal business proposal for cybersecurity services that would serve as bait for their trap. The terms were deliberately exploitative $10 million for basic network protection that should have cost $50,000. If they were desperate enough to accept those terms, it would prove that their outreach was purely transactional. As the date of their Christmas party approached, I felt a calm settle over me that I hadn't experienced in years. For 8 years, I had carried the weight of their rejection like a stone in my chest. Now I was finally going to set that burden down, not by forgiving them, but by showing them exactly what their conditional love had created: a man who had learned to succeed without them, and who no longer needed their approval to feel complete. The night before the party, I tried on the suit I planned to wear. It was custom-tailored, made from fabric that cost more than my parents had spent on groceries during my homeless months. Looking in the mirror, I saw someone they wouldn't recognize, confident, successful, and completely immune to their manipulation. Tomorrow, Harold and Patricia Blackwell were going to learn that abandoning your child because they won't follow your script is the most expensive mistake you can make. And I was going to be the one presenting them with the bill. The driveway of my childhood home was packed with luxury cars that gleamed under the warm glow of holiday lights. BMW sedans, Mercedes SUVs, and a handful of Teslas lined the circular drive like expensive ornaments on a very elaborate Christmas tree. I parked my Porsche Taycan between a judge's Bentley and a prosecutor's Audi, noting how perfectly my success fit into their world of material achievement. The house looked exactly as I remembered it: imposing, immaculate, and utterly without warmth. Every light was perfectly positioned, every decoration strategically placed to create maximum visual impact. This wasn't a home. It was a stage set designed to impress visitors and intimidate opponents. Tonight, I was probably both. I checked my watch: 6:28. Perfect timing to make an entrance without appearing eager. The briefcase in my passenger seat contained everything I needed for the evening's performance: the surveillance reports, witness statements, financial documents, and a recording device that would capture every word of our family reunion. The front door opened before I could ring the doorbell. My mother stood there in a burgundy cocktail dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, her smile so artificially bright it could have powered the Christmas tree behind her. "Carson," she exclaimed, opening her arms, as if we were long-lost relatives reuniting after a pleasant vacation. "Look at you, so handsome and successful." I accepted her hug with the same enthusiasm I might show for a business handshake, noting how she seemed smaller than I remembered. 8 years had aged her more than I expected, though expensive skincare and regular Botox treatments had done their best to hide the damage. "Hello, Mother," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Thank you for inviting me." She led me into the living room, where at least 30 people were mingling with cocktails and appetizers. I recognized most of them judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and their spouses. The legal elite of Seattle gathered to celebrate another year of profitable justice and professional advancement. The conversations paused as I entered. Several people stared with the kind of recognition you see when someone famous walks into a restaurant. They knew who I was now thanks to the Forbes article, but they had no idea I was Harold and Patricia's mysteriously absent son. "Everyone," my mother called out, tapping her wine glass with a sterling silver knife. "I'd like you to meet my son Carson. He's the brilliant entrepreneur who just made the Forbes 30 Under 30 list for his cybersecurity company." The room filled with polite applause and impressed murmurs. I shook hands and accepted congratulations while studying the faces around me. These people had no idea that the Munchins Alangas brilliant entrepreneur Ebolsins Alam the tree night they were celebrating had been disowned by his hosts and left to survive on his own for 8 years. My father approached with a bourbon in his hand and that familiar authoritative bearing that had intimidated me as a child. He looked distinguished in his charcoal suit, every inch the respected judge who commanded courtrooms and influenced careers. Son, he said, extending his hand with a firm grip. Congratulations on your success. We always knew you had it in you. The lie was delivered with such confidence that I almost admired his audacity. He had always been skilled at rewriting history to suit his narrative, but this was impressive even by his standards. Did you? I asked mildly. That's interesting because I don't remember receiving any expressions of support during the past 8 years. His smile flickered for just a moment before returning to full strength. Well, you know how it is with young people. Sometimes they need to find their own way before they're ready to accept guidance. Before I could respond to that revision of our history, my mother appeared at my elbow and guided me toward a quieter corner of the room. Carson, we should talk privately, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. About why we asked you here tonight. She led me into my father's home office, the same room where they had disowned me 8 years ago. The leather furniture, law books, and judicial portraits were all exactly as I remembered them. Even the temperature felt the same, cold enough to preserve evidence. Dad joined us and closed the door, creating an intimate atmosphere that felt more like a business negotiation than a family reunion. They offered me a drink, which I declined, and then settled into their chairs with the practiced ease of people about to present a closing argument. Carson, my father began. I'm sure you're aware that our firm has been facing some challenges recently. Certain allegations have been made, and we're dealing with a federal investigation that's based on completely false accusations. We need to protect our digital communications and client files from overzealous investigators, my mother added. Your cybersecurity expertise could be invaluable in helping us navigate this difficult situation. There it was, the real reason for their sudden interest in rebuilding our relationship. Not love, not regret, not a desire to make amends for 8 years of silence. They needed my services, and they thought they could manipulate me into providing them. I see, I said calmly. So this invitation wasn't about family reconciliation. It was about hiring SecureVault for your legal troubles. My mother's expression softened in what I recognized as her sympathetic prosecutor, face the one she used with juries when she needed to appear vulnerable. Of course we want to rebuild our relationship, she said. But we also thought this could be an opportunity for you to help your family while expanding your business into the legal sector. It's a win-win situation. And naturally, we'd be prepared to offer very generous compensation, my father added. Plus, we've been reconsidering some of the financial arrangements we modified 8 years ago. Your trust fund, your inheritance, all of that could be restored. I had to admire their strategy. They were offering me money I had never needed, inheritance I had never wanted, and the conditional love that had already proven worthless. It was exactly the kind of proposal that might have worked on the broken, desperate young man who had left this house 8 years ago. Unfortunately for them, that young man no longer existed. That's a very interesting offer, I said, reaching into my jacket pocket to activate the recording device David had given me. Could you be more specific about the terms of this arrangement? For the next 20 minutes, they outlined their proposal with the kind of detail that revealed just how desperate they were. They needed SecureVault to encrypt their communications, scrub their digital footprints, and create secure channels for discussing their legal strategy without federal oversight. They were willing to pay $10 million for services that should have cost $50,000 plus, restore my access to family money I had never needed. The most revealing part was their complete lack of awareness that they were describing felony obstruction of justice. They spoke about hiding evidence and misleading investigators as if these were normal business practices rather than federal crimes. This all sounds very reasonable, I said when they finished their pitch. But before we move forward, I think the rest of your guests should hear about this exciting new family business partnership. Their faces went pale as I stood and walked toward the door. Carson, wait, my father said urgently. This is a private family discussion. There's no need to involve our guests. But Dad, I replied, turning back to face them. Didn't you just say that families should support each other? I think everyone would be delighted to learn how the Blackwell family has decided to work together. I opened the office door and stepped back into the living room, leaving my parents no choice but to follow. The party was in full swing, with conversations flowing as smoothly as the expensive wine my mother had selected for the evening. "Excuse me, everyone," I called out, raising my voice to carry over the background noise. "Could I have your attention for a moment? I have something special to share with you about family values and the Christmas spirit." The room gradually quieted as guests turned to focus on me. I saw curiosity in some faces, anticipation in others. None of them had any idea they were about to witness the destruction of a reputation that had taken decades to build. My parents stood frozen behind me, trapped between their desire to stop what was about to happen and their need to maintain appearances in front of their professional peers. They had built their careers on controlling narratives and managing perceptions. Now they were about to learn what happens when someone else takes control of the story. "I'd like to tell you all about the true meaning of family loyalty," I began, "and what happens when parents decide their love comes with conditions that their children refuse to meet." The room was completely silent, now 30 pairs of eyes focused on the Forbes featured entrepreneur who was about to deliver a presentation none of them would ever forget. I walked to the front of the living room, where my mother's grand piano provided the perfect backdrop for my impromptu presentation. The assembled legal professionals watched with the kind of intense attention usually reserved for closing arguments in high-profile cases. Behind me, I could hear my parents' sharp intake of breath as they realized they had no way to stop what was about to unfold. 8 years ago, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent room. "I left this house with a laptop, 2 suitcases, and a dream to build a cybersecurity company. My parents, Judge Harold Blackwell and District Attorney Patricia Blackwell, made it very clear that they would prefer to have no son at all rather than a son who wouldn't follow their predetermined path." I paused to pull my phone from my pocket, connecting it to the Bluetooth speaker my mother used for background music during parties. The first image that appeared on my phone screen was a photograph of one of my returned birthday cards, the red "Return to Sender" stamp clearly visible. "This is a birthday card I sent to my father 3 years ago." I continued, holding up my phone so everyone could see. Like the 37 other cards I sent over 8 years, it was returned unopened. Not because they had moved or changed addresses, but because they had decided I was dead to them. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances that suggested this wasn't the kind of family sharing they had expected during a Christmas party. Judge Martinez, one of my father's longtime colleagues, looked particularly disturbed by the revelation. I swiped to the next image, a surveillance photograph of me loading boxes at the Northwest Distribution Warehouse, taken during my second year of exile. The timestamp showed it was 3 in the morning, and my exhaustion was visible even in the grainy night vision quality. While I was working midnight shifts to pay for a studio apartment in Rainier Valley, my parents were paying Northwest Intelligence Services to document my struggle. They knew exactly how badly I was doing, and they chose to watch rather than help. My mother's face had gone ashen. She reached for my father's arm, but he stepped away from her touch, his judicial composure cracking under the weight of public exposure. "Carson, this isn't appropriate," he said, his voice carrying less authority than usual. "These are private family matters." "Private?" I laughed, a sound that carried no humor. "Dad, you hired investigators to photograph me sleeping in my car. You documented my homelessness and shared the reports with Mom. Nothing about this has been private." I swiped to the next piece of evidence, financial records showing the payments to Northwest Intelligence Services, along with email communications between my parents and the investigation firm. But the surveillance was just the beginning. I continued, my voice growing stronger as I felt the power shift completely in my favor. When my first company, Data Fortress, was close to securing funding from venture capital, my father used his legal connections to convince the investors that I was unreliable. He actively sabotaged my business prospects, to ensure I would fail and come crawling back. The room was completely silent now, except for the faint sound of Christmas music still playing in other parts of the house. Several guests had set down their drinks, too absorbed in the unfolding drama to maintain party etiquette. Mrs. Chen, the wife of a federal judge, spoke into the silence. "Harold, is this true? Did you really disown your son for 8 years?" Before my father could answer, I played the audio recording David had obtained my father's voice saying, "Good. Maybe he'll learn some humility and come back to us on our terms," in response to a report about me collapsing from exhaustion. The effect was immediate and devastating. Several people gasped audibly. Judge Martinez stepped away from my parents as if they were contaminated. The social dynamics in the room shifted visibly as the legal community's elite realized they were witnessing a character assassination that was entirely deserved. "The reason you're all here tonight," I continued, "isn't to celebrate Christmas or family reconciliation. It's because Harold and Patricia Blackwell are under federal investigation for corruption, and they need cybersecurity services to hide their communications from investigators." I played the recording I had made in the office 20 minutes earlier, letting everyone hear my parents' voices as they described their plan to obstruct justice and offered me $10 million to help them commit federal crimes. The silence that followed was deafening. 30 of Seattle's most prominent legal professionals had just heard a sitting judge and a district attorney casually discussing felony-degree obstruction of justice as if it were a normal business transaction. My father finally found his voice. "Carson, you're taking this conversation out of context. We were discussing legitimate cybersecurity needs." Legitimate. I pulled up the final document on my phone, a formal business proposal that David had helped me draft. "You offered me $10 million for $50,000 worth of services. You specifically asked me to help you hide evidence and mislead federal investigators. There's no context that makes that legitimate." Uncle Robert stepped forward from the crowd. My father's older brother had always been the more successful and respected of the two Blackwell siblings, and his law firm represented some of the most influential clients in the Pacific Northwest. "Harold," Robert said, his voice cold with disgust, "is what Carson's saying accurate? Have you been paying to have your own son surveilled while he was homeless?" My father's composure finally cracked completely. "Robert, you don't understand the pressure we were under. Carson was throwing away every opportunity we had given him. We thought if he struggled enough, he would realize his mistake and come back to the family. So you decided to make sure he struggled as much as possible," Robert replied. "You sabotaged his business and documented his suffering for your own entertainment." My mother tried to salvage the situation with her prosecutor skills. "This is all being taken out of proportion," she said, her voice carrying the practiced authority she used in courtrooms. "Every family has disagreements, and we're working to resolve ours." "Patricia," interrupted Judge Chen, "you just heard a recording of you and Harold discussing obstruction of justice. That's not a family disagreement. That's a federal crime." I looked around the room at the faces of people who had respected my parents for decades. The disappointment and disgust were universal. Several guests were already reaching for their phones, probably to distance themselves from potential criminal associates. "I want everyone here to understand something important," I said, my voice carrying over the whispered conversations that had started around the room. "I didn't rebuild my relationship with my parents tonight because I missed them or needed their approval. I came here to show you all who they really are when they think nobody is watching." I pulled up the final image on my phone, a recent photograph of the SecureVault team celebrating our Forbes recognition. Amanda Marcus and a dozen other people who had become my chosen family, all smiling and raising glasses in a toast to success we had earned together. "This is my real family," I said. "People who supported me when I had nothing, believed in my vision when it seemed impossible, and celebrated my success without asking what it could do for them. Blood doesn't make you family. Loyalty does." Uncle Robert approached my parents with the kind of expression usually reserved for defendants receiving life sentences. "Harold, Patricia," he said formally. "Effective immediately, you are both suspended from all leadership positions at Blackwell and Associates. The firm will be cooperating fully with federal investigators, and we will not be providing legal representation for your personal matters." The party was effectively over. Guests began leaving with polite excuses and awkward goodbyes, creating a steady stream toward the door that left my parents standing alone in their showcase living room. My father made one last attempt to salvage the situation. "Carson, you've made your point, but we're still family. We can work through this." "No, Yachter," I replied, surprised by how calm I felt. "We're not family. Family doesn't abandon each other for following their dreams. Family doesn't pay strangers to document each other's suffering. And family certainly doesn't try to manipulate each other with conditional love." I walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back for my final words. "When the federal investigators contact me, and they will, I'll be happy to share everything I know about your business practices. Consider it my Christmas gift to the justice system you've corrupted for your own benefit." As I drove away from the house where I had grown up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 8 years: complete freedom from the need for my parents' approval. They had given me the greatest gift possible when they disowned me, though neither they nor I had understood it at the time. They had forced me to become independent, resilient, and successful on my own terms. The war was over, and I had won not through revenge but through truth. Sometimes the best way to defeat your enemies is simply to let them reveal who they really are. 6 months after the Christmas party that destroyed my parents' reputation and ended their careers, I sat in my office reviewing the final reports from the federal investigation that had consumed their lives. Harold Blackwell had been removed from the bench and faced 23 federal charges, including bribery, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Patricia Blackwell had been disbarred and indicted on 14 counts of prosecutorial misconduct and evidence tampering. Their legal dynasty, built over 3 decades of careful networking and strategic manipulation, had crumbled in less than a year. Blackwell and Associates had dissolved after losing 90% of their clients. Their mansion in Bellevue was for sale to pay legal fees. Their yacht had been seized by federal marshals as proceeds from criminal activity. The irony wasn't lost on me that the cybersecurity expertise they had desperately needed to hide their crimes was the same technology I had developed during the years they left me to struggle alone. If they had supported my dreams instead of sabotaging them, I might have been willing to help them legitimately. Instead, their abandonment had created the very person who would ultimately expose their corruption. Amanda knocked on my office door carrying the latest financial reports that showed SecureVault's continued explosive growth. We had gone public 3 months after the Christmas confrontation, and our stock price had tripled as investors recognized the value of ethical cybersecurity leadership in an industry plagued by corner-cutting and privacy violations. "The Second Chance Foundation wants to schedule another site visit," Amanda said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "They're serving their 300th client next week and want you there for the celebration." The Second Chance Foundation had become my proudest achievement, even more meaningful than SecureVault's financial success. Using $5 million of my own money, we had created a comprehensive support system for young adults who had been disowned or abandoned by their families. The program provided housing assistance, educational scholarships, mental health counseling, and business development support for people trying to rebuild their lives after family rejection. The foundation's waiting list included teenagers kicked out for being gay, young women disowned for refusing arranged marriages, and college graduates cut off financially for choosing careers their parents didn't approve. Each story reminded me that my experience, while painful, was far from unique in a society that often confuses love with control. Marcus appeared in the doorway behind Amanda holding a tablet displaying news coverage of our latest product launch. SecureVault's new artificial intelligence module could predict and prevent cybersecurity threats with 99.3% accuracy, making it the most advanced protection system available to businesses of any size. The Pentagon wants to expand our contract, Marcus reported. They're talking about implementing SecureVault across all non-classified defense networks. It would be our largest single client by far. I nodded, pleased, but not surprised. Our reputation for ethical business practices had made SecureVault the preferred choice for organizations that couldn't afford to compromise on security or integrity. We had proven that success didn't require cutting corners or manipulating relationships. My phone buzzed with a text message that I almost ignored until I saw the sender's name, Patricia Blackwell. My mother, facing federal charges and financial ruin, had sent her first direct communication since that disastrous Christmas party. Carson, I know you have every right to hate me, but I need to tell you that I understand now what we put you through. Losing everything has taught me what real suffering feels like, and I'm ashamed that we chose to watch you suffer instead of supporting your dreams. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that you were right about everything. Love shouldn't come with conditions. I stared at the message for several minutes, feeling surprisingly little satisfaction from her acknowledgement of guilt. The young man who had left their house 8 years ago had desperately wanted to hear those words. The successful entrepreneur reading them now recognized them as too little too late. I showed the message to Amanda and Marcus, both of whom had heard enough stories about my parents to have strong opinions about their character. "What are you going to do?" Amanda asked. "Nothing," I replied, deleting the message without responding. She's facing federal charges because of choices she made as an adult. I'm not responsible for fixing the consequences of her actions, and I'm not obligated to provide comfort to someone who spent 8 years denying me basic human decency. That afternoon, I drove to Tacoma to visit my grandmother, Eleanor Blackwell, who had become an unexpected source of wisdom and family connection. At 87 years old, she lived in an assisted living facility that provided independence while ensuring she had help when needed. Eleanor had reached out to me 6 weeks after the Christmas confrontation, explaining that she had always been proud of my achievements, but had been forbidden by Harold from contacting me during the years of family exile. Her small apartment was filled with newspaper clippings about SecureVault's success, carefully preserved in scrapbooks that documented my journey from unknown entrepreneur to Forbes recognition. "I saved every article I could find about your company," she explained during my first visit. "Harold forbade me from mentioning your name in his presence, but I never stopped being proud of my grandson." Eleanor's perspective on my parents' behavior was both compassionate and brutally honest. She had raised Harold after his own father abandoned the family, and she recognized the patterns of conditional love and emotional manipulation that he had learned to use as survival mechanisms. "Your father never learned how to love without controlling," she told me during one of our conversations. "He confused providing for you with caring about you. And when you chose a different path, he felt like his entire identity as a successful parent was threatened." These insights helped me understand my parents' psychology without excusing their behavior. Understanding why someone hurts you doesn't obligate you to maintain a relationship with them, especially when they show no genuine commitment to change. During today's visit, Eleanor and I talked about the foundation and my plans to expand its services nationwide. She had volunteered to help with fundraising using her connections in Seattle's philanthropic community to support young adults who needed second chances. "You know what, she said as we shared tea and homemade cookies. "Your parents thought they were teaching you about consequences when they cut you off. Instead, they taught you about resilience, independence, and the difference between conditional and unconditional love." "Do you think they'll ever really understand what they did wrong?" I asked. Eleanor considered the question carefully. "Patricia's message suggests she's beginning to understand, but understanding and genuine change are different things." Your father I'm not so sure about. He spent his whole life believing that success justifies any behavior and that worldview is hard to abandon. As I drove back to Seattle, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from a broken young man sleeping in his car to a successful entrepreneur surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me. The path had been longer and more difficult than necessary, but it had led to a life that was authentically mine rather than one designed by other people's expectations. That evening, SecureVault's entire team gathered at Marcus's house for our monthly family dinner, a tradition we had started to maintain personal connections despite our rapid corporate growth. 32 employees and their families shared stories, celebrated recent achievements, and planned future projects in an atmosphere of mutual respect and genuine affection. As I looked around the room at engineers, marketers, salespeople, and support staff who had chosen to build something meaningful together, I realized that my parents' abandonment had been a blessing in disguise. Their conditional love had forced me to find people whose care was based on who I was rather than what I could do for them. Amanda's 6-year-old daughter, Sophie, approached me with a drawing she had made during dinner. It showed stick figures standing together under a rainbow with SecureVault family written in purple crayon across the top. Mr. Carson, she said seriously. Mommy told me you help people who don't have families anymore. Does that mean we're your family now? I knelt down to her level, looking into eyes that held the kind of innocent wisdom that children sometimes possess. Sophie, I replied, you and your mom and everyone here tonight are the best family I could have asked for. We chose each other, and that makes it even more special. Later that night, alone in my penthouse apartment overlooking Elliott Bay, I opened the shoebox where I had kept all those returned birthday cards for 8 years. Instead of painful reminders of rejection, they now looked like evidence of my persistent hope and capacity for love, even when that love wasn't returned. I wrote one final card, not to my parents, but to the young man who had survived their abandonment and built something beautiful from the wreckage of their conditional affection. Dear Carson, you thought their approval would make you complete, but their rejection made you whole. You thought their love would make you successful, but learning to love yourself made you unstoppable. You thought you needed their family, but you built a better one. Thank you for never giving up on becoming who you were meant to be. The greatest lesson I learned wasn't about cybersecurity, business development, or financial success. I learned that some people will only love you as long as you're useful to them, while others will love you especially when you're not. The key to a meaningful life isn't earning conditional love from people who don't deserve you. It's recognizing unconditional love from people who do. My parents treated me as dead for 8 years, but their abandonment brought me to life in ways they never could have imagined. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is showing you exactly who they are, so you can decide whether they deserve a place in the life you're building. Family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about choice, loyalty, and the daily decision to support each other's growth rather than demand conformity to someone else's vision. I found my real family when I stopped looking for approval from people who had never truly seen me, and started building relationships with people who valued authenticity over achievement. The war with my parents was over, but the victory wasn't in their downfall. It was in the life I had created without them, surrounded by people who proved every day that love without conditions isn't just possible. It's the foundation of everything worth building. Have you ever had to choose between following your own path and keeping toxic people happy? Share your story in the comments below, and let me know how you found the courage to put your own growth ahead of other people's expectations. If this story inspired you to think differently about family relationships or success, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming adversity. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message about building their own chosen family, share this story with them. Sometimes we all need a reminder that our worth isn't determined by people who can't see our value. Thank you for taking this journey with me, and remember, the best revenge against people who tried to limit your potential is living a life that proves them wrong. Here's to building families based on love instead of control, and finding success on your own terms rather than someone else's script.